Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Legend of the GLORIO Heroes, episode 31. This is your go-to recap and reactions podcast for the legendary 1988 science fiction OVA. We are here. We have finally arrived in
Season 4, baby.
Yes, we are now in the final season of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. It's been a hell of a journey. We're not done quite yet, but it's kind of mind blowing, really. If you listen to our prior podcast and the one before that, I feel like we've been kind of on this kind of track for a while. But it's crazy, man. It truly is. Still here to guide you on this journey amongst the sea of stars. I am your host, Gee, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Iro.
I am also still here.
Yes.
I feel like getting into, because of the way we record season end podcasts, like the start of a new season is always like a longer break than usual. I'm going to say.
Yeah. I mean, yes, because yes.
Into it.
It definitely feels like it kind of feels like we went on like spring break or something, to give a peek behind the curtain. We tend to try and get our season wrap up podcasts. We try to finish those a little bit earlier just because they are such intensive productions for a myriad of reasons that we don't need to get into here. That we figure it's better sooner than later, even if we, release it at the regular scheduled time. So for us, it's been about maybe 3 weeks, since we kind of last watched the show. But
getting back into the rhythm,
and thankfully, we have an interesting trio of episodes
to kick off season 4.
Yeah, and help us remember what happened in season 3.
Yeah, it's been a few years.
What are those 3 episodes?
87, Premonition of a Storm. Episode 88, On the Outer Fringe. And episode 89, Roses at the End of Summer.
Yes, so we kind of kick off with episode 87, which, if I'm being frank, is... it has some interesting things going on, but I feel like it's maybe a little mundane by this show's standards. It almost feels like a recap episode in some regards.
Right. I'm sure, in context of watching this at the time or whatever, it's a little better to have that sort of in-depth recap.
Totally. Yeah, I didn't check myself, but I assume it's been a couple years for the people who were watching this at the time.
Yeah.
And, it can help to be reminded of, the big comings and goings of such a saga.
I believe this is 97 compared to season 3 ending in 95.
Well, yeah, exactly. So 2 years, that is quite a while. I mean... if we were to use the modern example, it's been about a year since we watched DNT, so, same thing.
Jesus Christ.
But, episode 87 opens with the narrator just being like, yeah, Reinhardt owns all of space, basically. Yep. No possible immediate military conflict could possibly occur now. Unless, yes. But the narrator also adds ominously, history will not allow society to stagnate. And kind of just ends it at that, because we jump into kind of Reinhardt back to work during peacetime. Yep. Reinhardt kind of opens up with talking to some guys, being like, I don't know if I want to do this palace thing. Like, he mentions
we need to save money.
Yeah, that actually, this is maybe the first time, maybe the second time in this entire show that the Empire side has ever mentioned the reality of, the economics of warfare. Reinhardt mentions that the Treasury is kind of stretched at the moment because of all the wars they've been fighting. It's kind of a throwaway line, but I feel like this and I think there was one line in season 3 for from some minister whose name I already forget, who was also getting some attention because he was complaining about the wars and
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like they're starting to like, for better or worse, Legend of Galactic Heroes always operated in this weird like paradigm where the FPA was constantly beset by like the economic and like social realities of waging war, whereas like
the Empire had reserves,
the
baby.
Empire just seemingly had endless reserves of manpower and cash flow. Like it didn't matter. Like apparently
there were a few bits of like Reinhard making a good Casus Belli meant lots of people were signing up.
Yes,
like
I guess that's true. I just feel like the Empire just seemingly apparently never had to worry about potential brain drain or the coffers going empty. They just always had enough money from somewhere, I guess. I don't know.
Halfway through season 3.
Yeah. It's not here until season 3, season 4 that Reinhardt is finally like, okay, all that money we fleeced from those nobles, like in season 1 and 2, is finally starting to run dry.
So he's basically saying, like, we should postpone building this big-ass palace because do I really need such an ostentatious show of authority?
Right.
I'm fine with living in this hotel room, like, whatever, man.
Yes. But Gluck is like, well, if you don't live in a palace, then all your subordinates will feel bad about living in a palace. Which, to which I respond, good. Maybe nobles shouldn't live in palaces. But
I mean, yes, but like the power structures of the Empire, don't really allow that sort of thing.
Right, they don't allow. Yes, for better or worse.
Culture.
Right, like for better or worse, the culture of the Empire means that like Reinhardt intrinsically sets the high end of the bar. Like, you know, you see this time and time again with like, you know, like them telling Reinhardt that, oh, Steinmetz never married because he said he wouldn't get married until you did. Or, yeah, like this part here where it's like, well, Reinhardt, if you don't live in a palace, no other noble would dare like try to live in one in fear of like, you know,
overshadowing you.
Yeah, and so I think that some of those like concerns are petty, but within the context of their culture, it does make sense. But
narrator,
you know, so they
goes into the narrator goes into a thing about how even though he's the Kaiser and he's great at politics and military, Reinhardt is still just a dude in his early 20s.
Yes,
doesn't really know about ordinary life.
Yeah, like they kind of mentioned, like, yes, he knows how to reform an economy, he knows how to reform a legal system. But, like, at its core, Reinhard is not particularly well-versed in non-military affairs. It's just not his specialty. Like, you can tell, like, where Reinhard's passions are, you know? Like, Reinhard probably, you know, like, Reinhard strikes me as the kind of guy who reads a book on, like, legal affairs because he knows that's what a ruler should do. But, like, he is definitely the dude who, in his spare time, is probably, like, studying battles. You know, that's where his real passion is.
Yeah.
But, they kind of move on from that, and we find out that Mittermeyer has kind of proposed a new plan to Reinhard. And Mittermeyer's plan, essentially, he wants to build 2 Iserlohns on each side of the Fazan corridor. Right. The idea being that now that Fazan is the new center of the galaxy, it makes sense to build a fortress on both sides. In both chokeholds, basically.
Gotta protect the capital, man.
Yeah, and during this conversation, Reinhard being Reinhard, like, flashbacks to, like, the time when Reuenthal asked him to save Mittermeyer, and you kind of have a little flashback to, like, back, remember that time in season 3 or whatever? Remember in season 3 when they had this flashback? Well, they're having that flashback again.
Indeed.
And, but this time we are getting it from Mittermeyer's perspective, where he has been imprisoned for executing a noble who was doing bad shit, basically.
Yeah.
And Mittermeyer's kind of, you know, sitting there in prison, and door opens up, and this motherfucker straight out of this motherfucker straight out of Fist of the North Star enters the room. This dude who claims to be a member of the Empire is like, ho ho ho, you know, blessed is he whose hobby and job are the same thing, and my job is torture.
I love to interrogate, and by interrogate, I mean pulling your teeth out and whipping ya.
I'm gonna whip you so hard, and I'm really good at it. It's like, this dude is like...
For like several minutes.
For several minutes, every time we return to the Empire, we are shown the most ridiculous people. Like, person could never exist in the FPA. Like, if this person lived on Heinessen, like, causality itself would, like, shift and morph to, like, push him off the planet, because he is too ridiculous. The Empire in general is just too ridiculous and too dramatic. It doesn't make any sense. But yes, this man just gloats to Mittermeyer about how good at torture he is, and how much he enjoys torture. He makes it very clear to Mittermeyer. He's like, Mittermeyer, I want to be clear with you. This is not just a job for me. This is a hobby, and I'm very good at my hobbies. And it's about to whip Mittermeyer, but Mittermeyer pulls some fucking counter hit bullshit and gets the dude caught up in his own electric whip. By the way, it was an electric whip.
Yes, stun whip.
Yes, and he gets electrocuted, and after that, the door opens up again. Landsberg, Count Landsberg from season 1, and his cronies show up.
Full cup,
and they're all like, you know, oh, Mittermeyer, yes. And Mittermeyer fucking turns out that Reinhard is not Reinhard is not uniquely an idiot in the Empire for constantly demanding 1v1s with young Wenli. It turns out that this is endemic to the Empire in general, because Mittermeyer
is very important to them, I guess.
Yes, Mittermeyer roasts Landsberg and then goads him into a 1v1. He's basically like, oh yeah,
and
big tough man.
Take off my handcuffs.
Yeah, like, take off my handcuffs and 1v1 me if you're so strong, if you're so, like, sure of yourself. And of course, Landsberg fucking falls for it, and Mittermeyer beats the shit out of him until his goons, like, you know, hold him down.
Even the goons are, like, laughing at Landsberg and his ass beat.
Yes. Well, yes, even the goons are like, fucking, this guy thought he could 1v1 Mittermeyer in a fit. Like, again, it's like, so we were all making fun of Reinhard for being like, Yang, I'm going to take off my shirt and meet you at the 7-Eleven. Turns out that's how every man in the Empire operates. So
yes.
It turns out Yang was just exploiting a very well-known weakness of Empire machismo.
Indeed. But once Landsberg's like, you fools, shoot him, they all pull out their guns, but the power trio of Reinhard, Turkey Eyes, and Reuenthal also show up with their guns.
Yes, and they blast them, or, like,
blast the guns out of their
hands. It's very funny to me because, like, you know, just the realities of animation, but, like, it's like the 3 beams come out, like, simultaneously, and, like, each one of them knocks one gun out of, like, one of their hands, and then, of course, the camera pans over to fucking Reinhard, Reuenthal, and Kirky just, like, standing there fucking Charlie's Angels style, and it's just, like, it's so fucking ridiculous. Like, is it like, before they ran in there, like, was Reinhard like, okay, when we run in there, we shoot on 3, you know, Kirky Eyes, you get the guy on the right, Reuenthal, you get the guy on the left. Like, it's just... everything they do in the Empire has to be so fucking dramatic, but yeah. So they rescue Mittermeyer, and
it says the bond between the four of them had truly been forged that night, because I guess apparently now Reinhard is good friends with Mittermeyer and Reuenthal, according to this scene.
Yes, and they also mentioned that because of these actions, like, they basically get sent to the front lines of the conflict with the FPA, which eventually is what we see in the events of the first movie and the opening episodes of the show itself.
The Force Battle Tiamat.
Yes, where Reinhard distinguishes himself on the field, and in many ways serves to benefit him more. But yeah, so, you know, just that ridiculous fucking Empire shit that is also kind of serves as like a weird flashback, but also explains, like, yes, how they all became friends, I guess. But speaking of Reuenthal, we return back to Heinessen, or Neue land, I suppose, and where Reuenthal is is doing his administrative shit.
Neue land is just such a funny name.
I can never call it that name in earnest. It's too fucking ridiculous. We have a great bit here where Reuenthal is, like, talking shit about how slow democracy is, and he's gonna impress them with swift administrative changes to show show the strength of a strong autocratic rule.
We'll easily ditch democracy if we show them how fast we can reform things.
How cool fascism is if we just make the trains run on time.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so he arrests all the shitty FPA politicians, you know. Right. If y'all remember, they used to have that treaty that was like, we guarantee that the shitty FPA politicians won't be prosecuted. But that original treaty was hinged on, you know, the assumption that, you know, they would not fucking try to sell out and execute Yang or the myriad of other issues that they ran into back in season 3. So now that treaty is null and void, Reuenthal is allowed to prosecute these politicians again.
See, but to win the hearts and minds, he also allows anti-imperial protests and
he ensures freedom of press, which I feel like is one of those things that feels like this feels like a very convenient cop-out to be like, oh, but see, Reuenthal is good because he allows freedom of press, but like, I feel like realistically, if you allowed freedom of press, like, again, not to say it's unrealistic that like the FPA, citizenship would bend so easily to autocracy, but I feel like in a realistic or a more realistic setting, if you allowed freedom of press, like, yes, the FPA has gone through some hard times. Yes, the FPA's leadership kind of failed them at every turn, but like, with the recent death of Yang Wenli, like, I feel like you're bullshitting me if you tell me that the FPA would just take that shit lying down. And I wonder how much of that is just also the convenience of the Empire getting to widely publicize that Yang's death was at the hands of, you know, a terrorist organization instead of the Empire, right? Like, imagine the world in which
surprisingly convenient for them that wasn't their fault.
Oh, it's very convenient, yes. Like, imagine the world in which the Empire is the one who executes Yang Wenli. Like, you can bet your ass they would not be allowing freedom of speech and freedom of press on Heinessen in a world where they have to announce to the citizenship of Heinessen that they pulled the trigger on Yang Wenli, because like that is a version, like that is a timeline in which I don't think the former FPA takes that line down. So like in many ways, it's the Empire has kind of been blessed with like a series of good circumstances that have only benefited them in the end. And I think we're kind of seeing that in action. Like Reuenthal can afford to be lenient because their fortunes have been so good that they can afford that. But anyways, you know, with all that, however, comes some drawbacks because Job Truniht arrives. Job Truniht, the parasitic plant, arrives on Heinessen, and you know, he immediately begins working for Reuenthal, you know, doing his slimy snake shit. Of like, oh, you know, I'm so honored to work with you, Reuenthal. I hope my meager experience can serve you. And Reuenthal is like obviously not fucking convinced by any of this shit. He wants Truniht tailed immediately. He wants to be informed of the first chance Truniht fucks up, so he has an excuse to just, you know, shoot his ass. Bergengrun, of all people, kind of mentions like, are you sure this is a good idea? Like, what happens if our interference with him is actually what like sets like. Funnily enough, Bergengrun, maybe prophetic here, but about the wrong person, is like maybe like overzealously like prosecuting him will actually be what pushes him into like fighting against us, which I feel like is the same concern that like the Empire leadership has with Reuenthal, of like if we push Reuenthal too hard, he might actually just go ahead and commit treason.
Yeah,
but Reuenthal says like, no, this is necessary. Like, even if, again, continuing the trend of nobody understanding why Reinhard gave Job Truniht this job, Reuenthal's like, even if I don't understand why the Kaiser did this, like, I still need to like be wary because, you know, Reuenthal tries to rationalize that even if Kaiser Reinhard thinks that this was a smart choice, like, there's no telling how Oberstein is going to capitalize on this. And then Reuenthal has a very funny line of, like, we can't just kill him. I can't just kill him because I hate him. That's not how autocracy works. And I'm like,
it works exactly like that.
I was like, dog, I think that's exactly how autocracy works. Like, we all just gotta forget that time Reinhard executed, like,
all the men under 10 or over 10.
Yes. Or all of the, like, FPA, like, traitors who sold out Labello, like,
right.
without a trial. Like, my guy, that is how this autocracy has been operating since day one.
Indeed.
But yes, so they kind of after that we returned back to Fazan, where Mittermeyer meets up with his wife Ava for the first time
sitting in the fucking airport terminal in full High Admiral uniform.
Yes, like surrounded by everybody else who's just dressed in like. Yes, everybody else is just kind of surrounded in like regular, like, Hydison/Fazan clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, just it's such a good look. Like, you just got to imagine, like, you're also there at the airport waiting for your wife,
mm-hmm.
and you're like fucking sitting next to this dude dressed in his ridiculous full fucking regalia.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, they meet up again, proving that Mittermeyer and Ava are like
the only happy couple still remaining.
Yes, the only other happy couple in this universe that aren't the Castle News.
Right.
And we are told that Mittermeyer, Reinhard wants to meet up with Mittermeyer and Ava. However, we're also informed that Mittermeyer has been having fevers again.
Yep.
I'm telling you, man, they keep bringing, like...
They do.
I feel like...
Thing. It's straight up a thing.
I know. That's the thing. I feel so vindicated here, but also, like, I feel like this is, like, really, like, this is kind of, like, they're doing a really good job kind of slowly building the dread here, because, like, you remember back, like, season 2 and 3, right? Like, Reinhard getting sick was, like, a one-off thing. It was like oh no, the Kaiser is sick from overwork. But I feel like they've been kind of slowly building up how frequently he's been getting sick.
Yeah.
And, like, I really think that, like, he's gonna get diagnosed soon, and we're gonna find out, like, some shit's going on. But anyways, Reinhard luckily managed to pull it together in time and has a double date with him and Hilda and Mittermeyer and Ava. And, they're just kind of talking, and apparently now that we have the benefit of hindsight of these 3 episodes as a whole, we now know that the most important part of this conversation was Mittermeyer informing
your wife, Mittermeyer.
Right, Reinhard, how he proposed to his wife, and how Mittermeyer has always been the most fucking just ridiculous but earnest goober in the Empire.
Yes.
And just somehow got lucky enough to just happen to propose in his ridiculous way to the one woman in the entire galaxy that would put up with that.
Yes.
But,
so they go to their modest little 2-story house on Fazan, their new home.
Yes. And they're walking home and just talking about life, and the thunderstorm starts happening, and the episode just literally ends with... Yes, the episode just literally ends with Reinhard...
most powerful man in space.
Yes. It's just Reinhard staring ominously out the window with the thunderstorm. Just... it's like not just the people of the Empire operate on this fucking level of melodrama. It is like wherever the people of the Empire are, the universe itself like alters its sense of causality to also operate on these same melodramatic standards. And it's very good, but it is also ridiculous. But yeah, that's kind of all there really is to say about that episode. I feel like, it was a fine episode, but I would also say that, like, I would say the episode kind of just basically sets up, like, what is the new status quo of season 4, and kind of recaps you on some of the essential relationships that I think are going to matter moving forward in season 4, right? Like Reinhard's relationship with Mittermeyer and Reuenthal, Reinhard's relationship with Hilda, Mittermeyer's relationship with Reuenthal. I think these are all things that are going to
be very important,
come into play in season 4. Yes, especially because, again, this episode also has lots of shots of Reuenthal just kind of staring off into the distance, and even if you can't hear what he's thinking in his head, he's thinking in his head, maybe I should commit treason.
Oh God, all these troops.
Yes. The narrator makes sure to remind us all that Reuenthal is explicitly the second most powerful man in the galaxy now. But let's move instead to the least powerful faction in the galaxy in episode 88.
Indeed.
We return back to to Iserlohn.
Yeah, we open up with just the Frederica's speech from the end of season 3 about how thank you all for fostering this bud of democracy in these difficult times. Here's this big photograph of young Wenli on the wall.
Yes.
Let's sing the anthem and etc. etc.
Yeah, and there's kind of a good bit here where the narrator states that, like, for the story of the FPA, like, their story is the story of the only choices rather than the best choices, which I feel like is a very good way of, like,
Yes.
like if you were to like write a eulogy for the FPA, it would be they made the only choices they had available to them rather than the best ones.
It's like some people criticized the choices of the government for having young Wenli's closest confidants be in positions of power,
and it's like, but in many ways, it's like it's not. You're right. Like, were those the best choices? Perhaps not, but were those the only choices they could have realistically taken in the absolute dire straits they found themselves in?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so then we go to Julian sitting on the old Yang bench in the park of Iserlohn.
Yep, just the old Yang bench.
Julian looking a lot more like Yang these days, like even down to the mannerisms, like crossing his arms, hunched over, like you know, just worrying about life.
Yep,
and some child, like real young kid cadet approaches Julian.
Yep.
And
kid who was about as old as Julian was when he was first adopted by young Wenli.
Yeah, and just basically, you know, says some shit like, "Wow, Julian, such an honor to meet you. You're such an inspiration to us all." And Julian kind of flashbacks to when he first met Yang, and it's very funny, of course, because like it's wide-eyed young Julian like happily greeting Yang, and Yang just like, "Huh." Like, who are you again?
Which is very on brand.
Very on brand for the late great young Wenli. But
yes,
yeah, and it's just this conversation. Julian kind of just has a conversation with himself again, and just about like the very heavy burden he has decided to shoulder for himself. You know, at the ripe age of 18, and
yes, and
you know, and it's like it's really interesting. You know, like looking like. Seeing that flashback Julian, like we never saw Julian that young even in season 1, but like he didn't look that much older than he did in that flashback in season 1. And like seeing that, like it's been very subtle, but Julian has grown up. Like he is older and harder now than he was in season 1. Like it was a subtle thing, and I think we didn't really start to notice until season 3, but like he's starting to show his years, you know, like he's starting to, with the realities of the burdens he has taken on for himself, you know, and I don't know, man, I just hope that poor kid does not work himself into an early grave, but, you know, we shall see.
Thinks about how, feelings are passed on between people. He's going full on young Wenli at this point.
Oh, yes, he's gone full young Wenli, you know, like he's not, you know, like it doesn't even need a ghost of Yang anymore. Like he's just having these conversations on his own, which is very, very funny to me, I guess. And,
and meanwhile, Dusty and Poplan are also discussing the current situation.
Yes,
now, how can we hold together without young Wenli? Yeah,
you know, reminds us that they have 600,000 left. You know, like that's. Not even like 1% of even like Reuenthal's army, no less the entire like Galactic Empire, you know, and you know,
Dusty says
they're just talking about like
Dusty says if this were a third-rate TV anime, dead protagonists could come back anytime, but we don't live in such a convenient place.
No, this is real life. This is a
first-rate anime. Pardon me.
This is a good. Yes, this is a good anime. Excuse you. We have a good bit of Poplan reading some more of Dusty's highly cliche prose and shitting on it, just because apparently we can add literary editor to Poplan's list of achievements. But yeah, you know they've kind of just accepted like in some aspects, you know they kind of occupy the outer fringe of civilization itself, you know, like maybe at the time, Yang Oh, by the way, yeah. So Julian kind of walked through the hallways and runs into Karin now, and
Yeah.
Karin kind of talks about how, like, at the time, like, Yang didn't seem that important, and she's like, back when I knew him, honestly, he kind of seemed like kind of a dumbass. I did not understand the hype, and she's like, and it's kind of interesting how, like, when people die suddenly, they become so much more important because you now realize, like, what the world is like in their absence, and that in many ways, like, yeah, Yang Wenli, maybe it's not a title he would have wished. It's a title Yang Wenli would have never wished upon himself, but Yang Wenli, in a ways, he single-handedly supported half of space. He supported half that believed in a liberal Republican democracy. And before they get into that, some jack off,
some drunk soldier guy shows up to
starts berating Julian about being a fucking piece of shit, about, like, how it's fucking bullshit that Julian is, like, the leader of the FPA, and Julian's kind of just standing there and taking it. Like, Karen's actually Karen gets so angry at this that she starts to berate Julian for taking all this insult until
Karen going on a lecture really pulls the mistletoe out of her voice.
Yes, and Julian accepts that too until this fucking jackoff says, like,
right.
Is like, well, and what about that young guy, huh? Fuck him.
He
like, what good did he do?
Died a brave death fighting Kaiser Reinhard.
Instead, he died like a fucking coward. And this is where Julian is like, motherfucker, what the fuck did you just say to me? And, like, you can tell Julian is about to kill this motherfucker. And once again, Poplan swoops right in to save the day. Poplan just, like, swoops in and is like, motherfucker, please, I believe you're speaking to our fucking, commander-in-chief here.
So if you piss him off, he'll turn you into meatballs.
Yes. Like, Poplan is like, I've seen this kid in action. Like, he'll axe murder a dude with the best of them. So you maybe watch your mouth. But, But yeah, so kind of after that, we kind of switched to kind of Shenkop talking with Kazalnu.
Yep.
And what is maybe like this conversation, I'd like to think of myself as, like, look, I'm not a true historian by training, but I have studied history a lot throughout my academic journey, and I'd like to consider myself, like, at least decently versed in history. But this show still manages to find ways to open up my eyes in some very good ways, and one of them is this conversation that Kazalnu has with Shenkop about kind of the future of the FPA, the future of what will their legacies be, and how, like, in many ways, we are always going to be the weaker organization because democracy is a system that exists to theoretically hold those in power accountable.
Right.
Like, democracy is a system in which the powerful can be brought low by the people. And, like, as a result, it will always be an intrinsically more fragile organization. And then Shenkop kind of waxes poetic about, like, how will they remember us, and how will they remember Yang Wenli and Julian Minchi? Will Julian be remembered as Yang Wenli's protege, or will Yang Wenli be remembered as Julian's teacher? And this is a really good conversation, and I have to give credit to you, Iro, because, like, while I obviously learned this concept in history, none of my professors ever used this term, but the term that you informed me about is this concept of historical contingency. And historical contingency, it basically came about as a counter argument to the kind of prior held assumption about history, which was that history was, to use another term, the term that I was familiar with, the idea that history was teleological. Teleological history, or as it is sometimes compared to a wig history, this is spelled W-H-I-G, not wig as in the wig you wear, but wig history is this idea that all human civilizations eventually build to a certain endpoint. And as a result, the events of history are inevitable. They are immutable, and they could not have occurred in any other way. The idea then is that in teleological history is that by analyzing the trends of the past, we can predict the trends of the future, because in that belief of history, X always leads to Y, always leads to Z. So when X happens again, we must prepare for Y so that we can better address Z. Now, teleological history is not completely without fault or completely without merit. However, it does assume a very predetermined concept of history that modern historical academia has really pushed back against. Yes, trends do exist, but modern historical analysis is more about historical contingency,
right,
which is this idea
the idea that stuff inevitably turned out this way is an idea you can only come up with in hindsight.
Yes. And that it does not take into account the feelings and the beliefs of the people who experienced that history in the moment. A classic example, of course, would be, say, to use an example that people might be familiar with. An example might be, say, the fame of Vincent van Gogh, right? The famous painter. In his time, everybody knows the story, right? Oh, Vincent van Gogh, he was cantankerous and a little bit crazy, and he died penniless, and in the time, nobody cared about him. He had this weird style that nobody appreciated. But now in our time, we recognize his genius and what he did for the art world and blah, blah, blah. That is a great example of historical contingency, is this idea that what the people felt and believed at the time does not always line up to the results that we
view in hindsight.
Yes. And so theological history is, of course we were going to beat Hitler. Of course we were going to defeat the Nazis. Of course we were. Because
events prior to this lined up in this way. We can say that it logically led to that, when
yes,
at the time that stuff was all way up in the air.
Exactly. It's kind of the same thing with the Civil War. In hindsight, you look at the quote unquote the stats, right? The differences in manpower, the differences in manufacturing, the differences in morale and leadership. And of course, in hindsight, it's easy to say, well, of course the Union was going to win the war. But in the time, of course people were not ignorant. Even in the time, even in the middle of the Civil War, people were aware of these realities. Lincoln knew how much of an advantage he held. The Confederate leadership knew how much of a disadvantage they held in terms of manufacturing and manpower. But in the time, at the moment, nobody can really tell, early in the war, when the Union was losing battle after battle. In the time, Lincoln was at risk of losing the presidency for re-election. People were totally ready to be wow, we better throw in the towel. The South might have this. It's very easy to forget that the current experience is as much a part of history as our retroactive analysis of it itself. And this is what makes history so fascinating, but also what makes history the kind of overwhelming rabbit hole that
Terrifying.
It is, because history is not just the study of an event. History is also the study of the people in that event. And then history is also the study of what historians thought of that event 100 years ago. That is an aspect of history itself. There's literally history of the Civil War devoted to analyzing what historians 100 years ago thought about the Civil War, of what they thought of the war. And it's some real mind-blowing recursive shit that is still undeniably important to study, because that helps better inform us about the human condition. And so, again, you could argue that Shenkop's just fucking shooting off a slick line here because that's what Shenkop do. But you could also say that this is Shenkop kind of getting at the core of sure, in the moment of Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Of course, young Wenli seems like this all-encompassing, incredibly important figure.
Yes. But when Julian Minchie VI, because sadly the FPA turns into an elective monarchy in the future. Sorry guys, bad future. But when Julian Minchie VI watches a documentary on the origins of the Iserlohn Republic, What is that? What is that documentary going to say? Is it going to say, oh, like Julian Minchie, the protege of the legendary Yang Wenli, Julian Minchie, he tried his best, or is it going to be legendary hero of democracy, Julian Minchie? Oh, he was taught by this guy named Yang Wenli, but he doesn't really matter.
The example I brought up that's in context of the show is that they're always talking about Heinesen, Ali Heinesen, the great hero who started the FPA, when they explicitly state he died halfway on the journey, and like Neue and Kim is the one who actually started
exactly, you know, and that's the thing, is like, it's so you'll have to excuse me, friends. This topic is one of my favorite topics in history. Not what I'm about to get into, but this concept of, and I'm so glad I have a name for it now, because I have talked about this. I've literally talked about this concept in this podcast before.
And so now to have a term, 3-paragraph explanation.
Yes. So another great example of historical contingency, specifically in military affairs, is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, blah blah blah, famous, hero of the Greeks, conquered, most, blah blah blah, half the known world, king of conquerors, had a very cool showing in Fate Zero, that guy. Yep. And we know, we in history, we now retroactively look upon him as like, one of the premier, like, yes, the Great, the one of the legends of military history. But and when we think, and maybe some people have heard of his name, but most people really don't know of him beyond being the father of Alexander the Great. And I'm talking about Philip of Macedon. These days, we kind of just know him as like, oh, that was Alexander's dad. And yeah, he like was also kind of a military, like, like a very good general in his own right, but like, he wasn't legendary. But in the time, Philip of Macedon was considered like the real fucking deal. Like before him, Macedon was kind of like one of the backwaters of the Mediterranean. Like, like the jokes that the Greeks would make would always have Macedon as like the backwater butt of the joke, like if a Greek was telling a joke of like an Athenian, a Spartan, and a Macedonian walk into a bar, the Macedonian was meant to be the butt of the joke. But Philip of Macedon, like, revolutionized the structure of his army, and in fact, many of Alexander's like military innovations were in fact like based in the foundation of what Philip of Macedon himself had created. And like he turned Macedon into a major power. And at the time, he like conceded the throne to Alexander. And like contemporary writers in Greece at the time were very much like writing in the tone of like, we'll see if the whelp of Philip has what it takes to like inherit his legacy. Right. Like we'll see if this fucking like hotshot kid actually is as great as he thinks.
Which is to say, like at the time, they didn't know Alexander would become Alexander the Great as we know him today. But today we look back and we're like, of course it's Alexander the Great, because look at all this stuff that allowed him to become Alexander the Great. Obviously, he would have been Alexander the Great.
And that's the thing. And I think it's going to be, and that's why I think it's actually a really fascinating conversation. And it's one that I doubt the show will answer. I don't think the show will ever answer it. But the question of like who will go down in history, who will become the titular galactic hero, in this show? Will it be Yang Wenli or will it be Julian Minchie? And I think that's a really interesting thing to bring up. But we can't spend all day on that, so we should move on.
Right. Julian put forth his plan, his secret plan to make things better, which is to somehow make the Empire set up a constitution.
Yes, so Julian's hope is that by spreading the ideals of democracy, that hopefully someday they can basically, like, their political clout will eventually allow them to kind of influence the Empire into instituting a constitution. Because if they can transform the Empire from a purely autocratic state into a constitutional one, like even if it's a constitutional monarchy, it's a start.
Yeah, it still gives more power to policymakers and people rather than...
And especially because at its core, the power a constitution holds, I mean, you only need to look at our modern political debate to see like how much weight a constitution holds.
Yeah.
Even if like the perhaps cynical take is that it's a 300-year-old document and how much influence should it really have in our daily lives. But this idea is that a constitution can allow like steady, gradual change to the, the fabric of a political system. And that Julian is not too worried about Reinhard. He does not believe they'll come after them because, for better or worse, Reinhard's fire has been extinguished. Without a young Wenli to chase after,
right?
He is no longer really interested in, what that speck of of dust over in Iserlohn is doing.
That said, they're still making sure to prepare for potential military action.
Of course, yes, because the time will come. Like, Julian is adamant, though, he believes that the time will come when, we're going to have to fight. And maybe, who could say whether it's the Empire or something else entirely, but someday we'll have to fight and we'll have to get ready. And Dusty says Dusty says, don't worry, like, no matter what happens, my foppery and whim will change history. And I'm just like, oh, Dusty.
All right, Dusty.
But
we got a quick montage of everyone still working, like, on the stuff, and we check in with Lieutenant Sewell, the sole survivor of the attack on Young's ship.
And in case you thought we had run out of sad scenes of people reacting to Young's death, season 4 still has a couple loaded for us. Like, yes, with Sewell finally waking up and realizing that he failed to protect Young. It's very Sewell realizing, oh god, like, I survived both Bucock and Yang Wenli. Like, what am I even doing with my life, And it's Julian's got to be the one there to pick up his spirits. We find out that Julian has started a new project, and perhaps one that may have greater... I personally think that like this is a low-key scene that actually might have very great consequences depending on how it is carried out. And that is that Julian has decided to organize and analyze drafts of Yang's documents and basically trace Yang's like mental thought processes and codify them. This idea being that like if we can figure out, because I think Julian recognizes this. It would be too simple to just say, oh, Yang's a once in a lifetime genius. Nobody could ever match him. And like, even assuming that is true, that is no reason why we should not analyze his teachings, analyze his strategies, and like train our next generation of tacticians to think like Yang Wenli.
Right. It's easy to say like Yang Wenli knew all these things, had the answers, but codifying, studying, and writing down like his specific thought processes, like the premises and process towards the conclusions that he reached, like that information can be passed down.
Exactly, and like I think it's more than, I mean, I think it's more than just that, but it's also like passing down that mindset,
right?
Because the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing that can happen in military like education is this idea of studying the tactics of the greats, and then just holding that as gospel. Like,
you need to study why and how those were important at the time,
right? And so the thing the thing that military education is trying to fix, but like for better or worse, like generals falling on the same old tricks they learned when they were young is maybe just one of those realities of the human race itself. But the modern militaries are trying to push back against that by trying to teach officers that rather than study the strategies and tactics themselves, what you actually need to be learning are the mindsets. Because hell, even a tactician like Yang, his strategies might not work forever. Like there will come a day and a time when like even Yang's like fucking ridiculous donut formations and seesaw like half circle formations may fail because like tactics is a constantly evolving paradigm. But if we can like codify his thought process, how he arrived at those conclusions,
we can find ways to apply that to the current situation.
Yeah, exactly. And so And then and so it's like maybe the FPA will never see another Yang Wenli. Maybe never ever. Maybe we won't get another one for another 100 years or 200 years. But if we can train our entire officer corps to try and think like Yang Wenli, then the pressure does not need to be as great because we are not putting all of our eggs into one alcoholic basket.
Indeed.
And again, I don't think this show is going to have a big time skip. I really don't think this show is just going to be and then 100 years passed or 50 years passed. But I still think that stuff like this, I think will have an effect in the future, whether we get to see it or not. And kind of with that, we have a bit here where Julian is kind of tracing Yang's thoughts, and he has a flashback to
season
the
1
fucking coup in season 1, and kind of Julian basically just kind of thinking about who Yang was as a person, and how Yang once celebrated with him when he realized that he figured out a way to effortlessly stop the coup, but then immediately became grim because, well, I'm also about to take thousands of lives, and that's who Yang Wenli is, or was. That's kind of the philosophy he always held, and I think that if only Yang Wenli were here is about to become the new if only Kirky Eyes were here.
Indeed.
But we now return to someone we haven't seen in a while, which is Frederica.
Yep. Well, she's looking at her picture of Yang, and
also kind of reminiscing about Yang Wenli, but kind of taking a different and maybe more emotionally raw tact here. She's thinking about how Yang Wenli, whether he likes it or not, is now become, as they say, he gets a new appellation now. He is now Yang Wenli, the guardian angel of Republican democracy. So add that one to the list.
Disease.
Yes, Yang Wenli, the hero of Alpha Seal, the magician Miracle Yang, the source of disease, Yang Wenli, the guardian angel of democracy, and also Yang Wenli, the pension thief.
Pension thief might be my favorite one.
Yes, kind of echoing the very sad kind of conversation Frederica had. Frederica thinks once again that the greatest tragedy is Yang Wenli didn't deserve to die a hero. Yang Wenli should have been accused of being a pension thief. Yang Wenli should have been the general who retired, one big she knows that Yang Wenli's real dream was to win one big battle, immediately retire, and then sit on his pension for the rest of his days.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, we know this was Yang's plan as far back as fucking Iserlohn, the first battle of Iserlohn in season 1.
Yeah.
But the tragedy is he never got that because it's what the circumstances of the time and at the time and world he was born into dictated that his hand was forced into becoming a legend. And and that yes, Frederica of all people knows how much Yang anguished over his actions. Frederica knows of all the people in the world, Yang truly despaired over the very real human consequences of his actions. Yang Wenli was no, let's be real, Yang Wenli was no pacifist. Yang Wenli was like a late stage Amuro Ray. He didn't like war, but he did what had to be done to save his people. But that doesn't mean he liked it. And
there's a line here where Frederica thinks you might have killed millions of people, but at the very least, you made me happy.
Yes, and it's it's a very funny line to laugh at in hindsight, but I think it really speaks to the volume of this idea of people are defined by their relationships, and yes, Yang Wenli, the historical footnote, is just the master tactician who won a few battles, killed millions of people, and then was assassinated. But Yang Wenli, the man, made a lot of people very happy. He inspired a lot of faith in a lot of people, and again, to kind of echo Shen Cup's conversation, is it gonna, is it gonna be? Is it going to be Planet Minchi with Yang Wenli Park, or is it going to be Planet Yang with Julian Minchi Park? You know what I'm saying? Where will Yang Wenli's place in history be? Will he be the legend to end all legends, or will he be the man who like inspired a legendary movement to take place? And but with all that out of the way, we find out that Konev on the undutedness has returned.
Yeah, we've brought stuff. We've brought some Alpha whiskey for you guys.
Also, some grave news that Job Truniht is back on Heinessen.
Right. And we continue
everybody there.
Yes, is like, not this motherfucker. And also everyone continues to be like, why is he being appointed to this position? What's the meaning?
What is the Kaiser's plan? Just everybody continuing, again, because of the way that Reinhard's government works. Everybody's just forced to assume, the Kaiser's got a plan for it all. And like the Kaiser just has to keep rolling with this mistake he's made because there's no going back.
And give the news that Job Truniht is affiliated with the Earth Cult people, which we've known for a long, long time.
Yes, but they have finally come to the realization of, and Julian is kind of inspired by this news because the narrator helpfully points out to us that Julian reserved for himself 2 goals. The first being to honor Yang's sacrifice and plant the seeds of democracy, and his second goal was to avenge his death. But before we can get into that, we find out that a sudden incident has occurred
at Nguyen Kim Hwa Park on September 1st, which we will not see in episode 89.
Which we do not find out in episode 89, so thanks for that, show. Spoilers, episode 89 does not get into what that incident is, but we should get into what episode 89 is about.
Indeed. Episode 89 opens with, the narrator saying that although Reinhard von Lohengram changed many things, got rid of many customs of the Golden Bum dynasty, there's a tradition that he was unable to change, and that's that the Kaiser is going to be an assassination target.
Yes. So we're told that Reinhard has once again been getting sick frequently, but he has not made it publicly apparent. He's making a public appearance at some fucking place in Fazan. I don't really know. It doesn't really matter.
A new cemetery for the war casualties.
Sure. Yes, that's what it was. And Reinhard's like honor guard are kind of walking around him, making sure he's safe. And they notice the assassin because he is the shadiest looking dude in this crowd.
One person in the crowd who's not cheering and who looks like he's about to kill someone.
Yes, like assassins in this universe seem to veer between either tragically effective at their jobs or hilariously bad at their jobs. This assassin falls into the latter category. Not even with a gun, he just tries to straight up tries to stab Reinhard with what looks like a poisoned stake or something.
Right, like a fucking wooden spike with stuff on it. Like,
yes, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, my guy, you could not get yourself a gun,
yourself a laser ring.
Or a laser ring, or a bazooka.
Got a corpse around you can pull a bazooka out of.
Yes, but so Reinhard's guards detain him, and they're all like, we caught this Earth Cult guy. And he's like, I'm not part of the Earth Cult. I'm from Westerland. And Reinhard's like, oh, shit.
Gasp.
Yeah, that's right, dog. You remember Westerland? Yes. So for those who have forgotten, Westerland is the planet that Reinhard let get nuked.
Right.
It is the planet that Prince Braunschweig nuked to the fit of fury that Reinhard knew was happening and had the means to stop and chose not to because it would turn the public's opinion against the Lipstadt League.
It would be politically
this man,
etc., etc.
Yes. Yeah, this dude, and he's finally getting called out for it. This guy's like, millions died on that planet. My wife and child are dead. Like, they were non-combatants. Like,
they literally got hit with nuclear weapons.
Yes, you condemn them all to death. And Reinhard is shook. Like, Reinhard is, like, literally, like, shaking here. He is actually, like, he has flapped.
Yes.
But who isn't flapped is Oberstein.
Oberstein steps in front and is like, actually, it was all me. not the Kaiser. It was all me. It was a good
Oberstein
idea.
once again. Yeah. Oberstein tries to do his fucking cold math of like, yeah, so like 3 million people died on Westerland, and sure they were civilians, but like if we hadn't if we had stopped that bombing, the war would have gone on like 3 more months, and 10 million people would have died. So really, I made a good choice, and I would do it again.
Like
and
calculus of war or whatever. What do they call it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, yes, it is the cold math of war. And like, here's the thing: even if Oberstein is correct, like that does not absolve that decision. Like this is the same. Again, this is the same. I'm not going to get to it here because it is a very contentious topic, but this is the same debate that occurs over like America's choice to drop nuclear bombs on Japan. This idea of like, was it worth bombing these two explicitly non-combatant civilian targets in exchange for potentially saving more lives in what would have been a bloodier, longer like land invasion? And this is a very difficult, conversation to have with no easy answers. But regardless, I think that what can be agreed to is that if nothing else, it is a fact that should, that the perpetrators should be held accountable of.
Yeah.
And Reinhard is now finally like being held accountable for this. And it does make me realize now, like, Reinhard probably allows, if Reuenthal allows freedom of speech, Reinhard probably allows freedom of speech, but now I'm beginning to wonder, were the events of Westerland ever publicized? Because now I'm beginning to because
it always I feel like it seemed to the public that Reinhard just was not able to get there in time.
Right, like that was probably the original party line, and is that probably still what's being communicated? Because I know the people like Reinhard, but if it were public knowledge that Reinhard could have stopped the bombing and didn't, like, I feel like that should actually be a far more damning thing to his reputation than it seemingly is in the show so far.
Right.
Like, I always operated on the assumption that this was private knowledge, that nobody knew about it, and that's why he was able to kind of get away with it. But if it does become public knowledge, I'm surprised that did not have greater consequences.
At least like a rumor, because Kirky has heard about it. Top brass probably knew all the while.
Yes. Of course, Kirky knew about it. Well, but he's like, yes, he's top brass. He's military leadership. That makes sense. But like, if the public still doesn't know about it, I feel like that in many ways like speaks volumes to how much Reinhard actually means it when he says, "Oh, like freedom of speech, like let the people know the truth."
Mm-hmm.
But regardless,
dude pulls out a couple young lines about like how
he's like
those in power always justify their actions by saying we sacrifice the few to save the many, but they themselves are never among the few who are sacrificed.
Exactly. Yes. The dude is pulling out some literal Yang lines here of like, yeah, like sure, you can say you sacrificed a small minority, to save the majority, but what about that small minority? And was it worth it? Like you killed non-combatants. This is one of those
signed up for this.
Yes, like this is you get into the very weird math of like what is the life of a soldier versus what is the life of a non-combatant. But like those 10 million that could have potentially died in that 3-month campaign were those soldiers. Like were those soldiers who signed up for and knew what they were getting into. The non-combatants did not. Like they did not agree to get nuked. And like, how does that affect the equation? And so, dude is dragged away. Reinhard kind of panically, like, asks Kessler, like, what will happen to that guy? And Kessler states that, according to pre-existing Golden Bomb law, like, he will be executed. Mm-hmm. He must be, because, like, that is not a law we have changed. And Reinhard is, like, forced to contend with the reality of, like, he cannot, like, spare this man because of what that does. Yeah, what that does to the reputation of his leadership, but he also does not want to enforce Golden Bomb law, and they're kind of left in an uneasy place. So Reinhard is just detain him. I'll decide what to do later.
Get some
And
flashback to Kirky Eyes telling him off for Westerland.
Yes, we are reminded that yes, Kirky Eyes all those years ago, like one of the few times Kirky Eyes was like very real with Reinhard, where like he literally says like, "Why would you debase yourself like that?" Like from a person like Kirky Eyes, that's like that's like the thing you never want to hear from a guy like Kirky Eyes, who's usually so
Kirky
polite.
Eyes is disappointed in me.
Yes. Kirky Eyes is the guy who would be like, "I'm not angry with you, Reinhard."
Everybody knows that's worse,
and like that would. Everybody knows that's worse. Yes. And Reinhard is so dramatic. He begins to pour himself a wine glass with wine until it overflows and it's all over his hands and it's red like the blood of Kirky Eyes.
Indeed.
Hilda comes in and she tries to like comfort Reinhard. Hilda tries to do a little bit of Oberstein here and try to appeal to Reinhard's like sense of like the net good he has done for the galaxy to assuage his self-doubt. Reinhard says, Hilda, please stay with me for the night.
Yep.
And kind of fades to black. And we cut
morning.
Well, we cut to next morning. We cut to Reinhard's bedroom, and we find out that Hilda and Reinhard finally did the deed.
It happened. It took 80-something episodes.
Yes, proving that maybe Reinhard does in fact know how to fuck.
Eyes. I got laid.
Yes, Reinhard clutching that locket, saying, "Hey, Kirky Eyes, I did it! I finally touched a boob."
Finally.
But are you proud of me, Kirky Eyes?
I did everything you said, Kirky Eyes.
Yes, but it's very funny. Like the events after this are very funny and almost a little surreal. Like it's almost like
I really
from
liked
this
it, but
from this moment onwards for the rest of this episode, it's like this episode shifted realities into a different genre of TV show. Hilda has to do the walk of shame because both Emil and a guard are stationed outside of Reinhard's bedroom, and they exchange a look, and they're just like,
I really enjoy Hilda's like utter panic at the entire situation because I think that's that's the actual appropriate reaction and not like what I kind of thought would be the reaction just in in like a story. You expect, because like we kind of saw this as inevitable. I kind of thought the story would also treat it as like, oh, and now they're a couple and it's fine, as opposed to no, this is a really messed up situation and she is losing it.
Yes, this is an extremely complicated situation because, like, Hilda is, like, caught in, like, 50 directions here. Like, I don't think Hilda regrets what she did. I think she genuinely wants to to do it with Reinhard. I think she genuinely likes Reinhard. But also, Reinhard is the most powerful man in the entire galaxy. Reinhard is responsible for the lives of 40 billion.
There's currently no room in their relationship for that. I feel like
she is Reinhard's subordinate. She is also like a public politician. Like she's a member of Reinhard's like government.
She's a military position.
Her dad is a member of Reinhard's government. Like this throws in so many equations, so many weird things into it. Like this is totally a thing that like you see in relationships that like start off really spontaneously. It's not that like the two parties don't want it to happen, but like after something like that happens, like ideally both parties take a couple days to like get it together and like kind of like rationalize it before like having that real like heart-to-heart talk afterwards. And so that's kind of what Hilda does. She kind of makes a run back for the Mariendorf Manor. Her like attendant is like, "Hilda, where were you last night?" She's like, "I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna have breakfast." And the elder Mariendorf, Papa Mariendorf, is just like, "So you weren't here last night." You just tell, like Papa Mariendorf has like such a fucking like not a shit-eating grin on his face, but he's like such a knowing look. Like
I also got the vibe he was trying very hard this entire episode to like keep himself measured.
Oh, of course. No. The elder Mariendorf is a pretty good father, all things considered. He knows his daughter well enough to know that, like, the elder Mariendorf is the kind of guy who knows that, like, this was going to be inevitable. But I think that elder Mariendorf also knew that whenever it did happen, it was going to be messy, and so he's trying to be as, like,
Yes.
gloves on about this as possible. Just like, well, let's have breakfast. Yep, totally normal. Nothing weird going on. Until the attendant shows up and is like,
the door. Who's the Kaiser?
The Kaiser's at the door, and Hilda is like, I'm going to my room.
I can't. Right. It's the most.
I absolutely cannot see.
The most flapped we've seen Hilda this whole show, I would say.
Yes. Like, she's like, I cannot see Reinhard right now. And, like, Daddy Mariendorf is like, give me a minute. Goes over there, finds. Thankfully, I love when they give us a trio of episodes where it's going to be really easy to pick the header image for this podcast, because I just get to pick fucking shoujo, like Otome game Reinhard blushing with the fucking bouquet of roses. We have Reinhard practically sparkling, blushing ear to ear, holding the biggest, like, if you thought Mittermeyer's bouquet of flowers was ridiculous, or wait, did he? How did it go again? Did Mittermeyer just, like, buy out a whole flower shop or something? I'm trying to remember how Mittermeyer did it.
He ran into the flower shop and was like, "Give me all the flowers!" And then everyone was started laughing at him, and he's like, "Okay, no.
Yeah.
Just give me the good ones.
Give me the good ones. Give me the good ones."
Justify again.
Yes. Okay. Yes, that's how it went. Yeah, but
right. Reinhard was like, "Oh, 2 episodes ago, Mittermeyer told me he brought a lot of flowers."
It's like Reinhard's only, like, it's like Reinhard's only context for how to propose to a woman is fucking Mittermeyer. Like, Steinmetz is dead. Like Steinmetz is dead. Reuenthal is dead. Like, all of his more measured admirals are, like, far away right now. Like, he's not gonna ask Oberstein. So, like,
ask Reuenthal, like, contain her in your house for a while.
Yes. Oh, boy. Well, that would be a good topic, yes, is love advice from the Empire admirals, yes. Like, Reuenthal would definitely be like, detain her in your house, and then, like, fuck her for a week straight. Yes, Mittermeyer is like, buy a flower shop. What would what's his name? What would Mecklinger's be like? Compose a sick
courtly
poem.
law. Let me teach you about courtly law. What does Bittenfeld do? What's Bittenfeld's love advice?
Oh, Bittenfeld's would be terrible, but also maybe, like, I'm trying to imagine, like, I think Bittenfeld's proposal would probably be, okay. So you remember in Gundam: The Origin when Dosle Zabi proposes to his wife? I think that's how Bittenfeld would do it. Bittenfeld would, like, tower over this poor woman. He would be a little nervous at first. He'd be, like, playing with his figures. He'd be like, I have a very accomplished military career. I've never lost a fight. Yes, you have, Bittenfeld. I've never lost a fight. I killed Bucock.
Bittenfeld Jr.
Yes, and then he would basically just do the double Commandant and be like, I, Bittenfeld, am asking, would you bear my children?
He would.
He would. And that poor lady. Man, I feel like we could come up with so many more, but for now, I just have to say, I didn't think anyone could beat Yang for most awkward proposal in this show. But somehow Reinhard beats him because he doesn't even propose to Hilda herself. He proposes to Hilda's dad, which, is maybe how they do things in the Empire. Right. He's
this is also Reinhard, like, reverting from God Emperor Kaiser of the galaxy to, like, child Reinhard who doesn't know what he's doing.
Like, this is the reminder that, like, we're not going to say that, like, Reinhard is emotionally stunted, but, like, he has really not grown as a person since, like as a person, like, as the human being he is around people like Kirkias and Anaros. the growth of that side of Reinhard came to a close when Reinhard died and Anna Rose cut herself from him.
The Kaiser of the Empire, considering the history of the Empire, having the Kaiser of the Empire be like, "Oh no, I slept with a girl. I need to take responsibility."
Right, is like the most fucking like of course you would, because like this is like reverted back to like
5 years ago. 5 years ago, the Kaiser had concubines.
Right. Like this is like this is Reinhard, like a combination of like his like young naivete, but also like yes, Reinhard of all people would be the person primarily concerned about like how the Kaisers like, you know, to quote a certain translation, how the lewd Kaisers of the past have ruined the lives of women. Of course, Reinhard of all people would be like, I would never do that to a woman. Not after what they did to my sister. Like I'll marry Hilda immediately. And Elder Mariendorf is like trying not to fucking lose it here. Like, you know, try not to laugh in the face of the Kaiser.
Feel the incredibly deep breath before every sentence coming out of Papa Mariendorf here. So he's like, "Look,
the Elder,
leave it to me for now. I'll deal with Hilda."
Yeah. He's like, you know, he's trying to let Reinhard down easy. He's like, Hilda is very happy, but she needs some time alone, and I promise you, when she's feeling better, I'll send her back to the palace. Okay, like just go away for now. Like, basically, just don't be here. Like you should not be here. Basically, like, remember what I said at the very beginning of this is like when like two people who like do like each other but have a complicated relationship finally get together, they often need a couple days to like pull, you know, like rationalize things for themselves. The problem then is that when one of the people in that relationship has that kind of like alpha type personality who like cannot stand the idea of like stewing in a feeling for a couple days, so like their immediate instinct is to show just like show up as soon as possible, when that is like actually the worst possible thing you could do. But yeah, so Hilda comes out of her room after Reinhard leaves and kind of has a conversation with her dad, you know, and like, you know, the Elder Mariendorf is like, I mean, you like him, don't you? And she's like, yeah, but I don't deserve to.
It's not that kind of relationship.
It's not worthy.
Like, it's really not.
Right, yeah. Or so she says, right? She's like, oh, like, I'm not worthy of him, and, like, it's not right, and, like, think about our connections, like, think about, like, what this would do to the government, and it's like, these are all, like, I mean, some of this is, like, Hilda trying to rationalize, but I think some of these are also very valid concerns, like...
But, like, they've never, between the two of them, she's never been in a position where, as she puts it, like, she could have love for him as the love between a man and a woman, because she's always been his subordinate, you know, like... Whether she likes him
right, like,
or not is secondary to their positions.
Yeah, like, this is a very complex relationship with an undeniable power dynamic, you know? Like, of course, every relationship is going to have a power dynamic to some degree, right? Just because people are people, right? People come from different backgrounds and different occupations. But, like, there's a reason why, like, for example, HR says, like, don't date your boss or your subordinates, right? Like, don't date your teacher. Like, don't, you know, like, don't date your coach. Like, there's a reason why, like, you know, these...
unwritten rules.
Not law. These unwritten rules exist is because they undeniably change things. And they don't just change things between those two, they change things in the entire dynamic. Like, you know, again, the Elder Mariendorf is like, look, like, just take a couple days to think about it, okay? And like then he kind of like thinks to himself, like, man, I'm probably gonna lose my job soon.
I better get to work.
Like, yeah, like, and also kind of has a fun bit here where he's like, man, I'm surprised Hilda and Reinhard even knew how to do
it. Right. I mean, he's like compares Reinhard to as they put it here, the Northern Comet King, which I looked up, and it's apparently Charles the 12th of Sweden, who I don't know anything about.
Huh. But, not off the top of my head. I'm afraid I did not look that up beforehand.
famous for abstaining from alcohol and sex and being most comfortable during warfare.
Ah, kind of reminds me of a certain fellow.
But
well, maybe not the alcohol. Reinhard certainly loves
yes.
the alcohol, but
I guess I'd like this line from Papa Mariendorf, where he's like, well, rulers who are incredibly well versed in warfare tend to be deficient in the other direction, in another area, and at least Reinhard is not abnormal in the other direction of being a crazy horn dog and terrible at war.
Yes, it's very good. But yes, I just can't help but kind of laugh at the elder Mariendorf's musing of like those two are like the most fucking like extremely capable individuals, but when it comes to like sex and relationships, are probably like the two most awkward human beings on the planet. Like,
yeah.
Like, here's the thing: I'm not one to like make guesses about what Yang's married life was like,
happy.
But they seemed happy, and also Yang was shown to have an interest in women beforehand, right? Like with Jessica Edwards.
They had a more natural relationship, even though she was an assistant and subordinate. Like they had a more natural relationship.
They had a dynamic. Right, they had a dynamic. Well, the thing is, they had a pre-existing like dynamic that went beyond just like their work relationship, right? Like they got along as genuine like friends, and so like when they get married, I mean, also it doesn't change the power structure that much. Like Yang and Frederica get married, and everybody's reaction is just like finally,
right?
Or well, it's either finally or wow, Frederica really fucked up, huh? Which is like
also they retired.
Yes, but it's just more like it was a much more natural relationship. My point is saying is like I do not need to see Yang thrusting his dick on screen to assume that he knows how to fuck. I am just saying Yang probably knows how to fuck. Reinhard and Hilda.
Reinhard needs Kirk guys there to show him.
I almost don't want to even. Right, like I don't want to like get too fucking like gross here, but I'm always trying to imagine that like while the deed is being done, Reinhard is probably like clutching Kirkias's amulet in one hand. Like
he was
like Kurt like it's a kind of like Jesus take the wheel moment. Like Kirkias guide my dick.
Yep.
And so with that, we
Reinhard in his office wondering about this.
Right, and yes, and he is informed by Kessler that the assassin has committed suicide. And in many ways, this is probably the ideal scenario.
They do go through how Reinhard's like, by suicide, you don't mean that you just killed him, right? And they kind of go into how, no, they didn't kill him, but they didn't stop him from committing suicide at all. And what else were they going to do?
The idea being that, like, in many ways, like Westerland, inaction was more politically expedient. And, like, for better or worse, I think this release, I mean, I'm not saying that this was a bad thing, but what I am saying is that this very much speaks to, like, that trope of, like, who you are in the dark, right? Like, who you are when you're alone. Like, for better or worse, for all the moralizing the Empire does, this is who they are, right?
Yeah.
Like, they'll make the hard choices when they have to, but if a politically expedient, easy choice presents itself, they'll take it, like, regardless of, like, whatever, like, collateral damage it does. And, kind of with that kind of concludes the end of episode 89.
Yeah.
And, with that, this trio of episodes
comes to a close.
How you feeling about the start of season 4, Iro?
I'm into it. I want to see like where we go from here. Obviously, I guess like I assume the next episode or two of the Empire side will be like about Hilda and like political restructuring, considering that and how that'll turn out. But also, what's the incident in New Kim Hwa Park? I want to know. That's probably going to involve
we
Reuenthal
still do not
somehow.
know. Yes. We still are not aware of those events, and if nothing else, season 4 has done a pretty good job of, as always, setting up some
Right.
good, compelling plot threads
Like
for us to follow.
how can
we have
considering that the main situation right now is Reinhard Reuenthal stuff, how can we drag the Iserlohn crowd into this?
right, like, what is Iserlohn's next course of action? Where does Reinhard and Hilda's relationship go? What happened at the park? And some of the stuff they said from last season, right? Like, what is Lang and Rubinsky up to?
Right.
We haven't seen them in season 4 yet, but we know they are planning things. And related to that, what about Oberstein?
Yeah.
And I think even more importantly, what's Mecklinger doing? Give us more Mecklinger, damn it! I'm fucking angry, man. Like,
Admiral Mecklinger.
we have been promised Mecklinger time and time again. This motherfucker still will not show up. The show denies us our rightful fucking fix of Mecklinger, and I don't know how much longer I'll tolerate this. But yeah, I think that's gonna call this one a podcast. So let's do the basic housekeeping. As always, you can catch this podcast and the rest of our content on theglorioblog.com. You can follow us on Twitter at theglorioblog. You can listen to this podcast on Spotify, Google Play, Podbean, wherever else podcasts are stored. You can also we also upload these podcasts to YouTube, so check that out if that's kind of more your speed. If you have the time and the interest, you can maybe check out our sister podcasts, the GLORIO Chat, where we just finished talking about our preview of the upcoming season, kind of what are the highlights, the lowlights, what our expectations are for the fall.
Including the something called Legend of the Galactic Heroes
Yeah, DNT is airing. Season 2 of DNT is airing soon, and I think inevitably we're going to watch that because that's who we are now.
Yeah.
It's going to be a real interesting return to Amlitzer, because now that we've watched the show, or the OVA, the context of so many things, even if they're relatively similar, are so different in the beat to beat moments that I'm really actually kind of curious how certain things will play out. We can talk about it here because we don't need to worry about spoilers. But how is Kirkiaz going to die in DNT?
Right, where we'll get the bazooka and the corpse.
Right, something that dramatic just does not feel like DNT style, because DNT is so much more the nice word is grounded, the maybe meaner word is boring in its execution. I just don't see them doing stuff with that same level of absurd theatrics. But I think we'll have to see. I also want to point out once again, I don't like Bogdashu's new design.
I actually don't recall it, so I need to see.
All right, you'll have to check that PV again. He's I think Iro.
I mean, you said he doesn't look like Bogdashu at all, so I probably didn't even register that it was him.
Iro, I think you summed it up best as what Bogdashu should look like.
He needs to look like a used car salesman.
Yes,
or it's not right.
Okay, you know what? I will say this. Now that you've said that out loud, the Bogdashu in DNT does kind of look like a used car salesman, but he looks like a way shittier, less self-aware one. The used car salesman Bogdashu of the original OVA looks like a guy who knows he's shady and leans into it, whereas the Bogdashu in DNT just looks shady because that's just who that guy is. And he's still convinced he's a normal person, and that he's convinced everybody he's a normal person, but he is not actually a normal person. But we'll have to save that for our inevitable DNT corner of this podcast once that starts airing. Yes, we're going to recap both the OVA and episodes of DNT at the same time. But yeah, I think that'll. Oh, also the other sister podcast, GLORIO's King of the Kaiju, where our GLORIO British correspondents talk about kaiju movies. I think a new one of those
about Space Amoeba
just came out. Space Amoeba, yes, definitely something. I've never heard of this movie before, but certainly got a vibe to it. But yeah, okay. With all that said and done, I think that'll do it. So, as always, to everybody listening, welcome back, and thank you all for staying with us. I hope you'll stick with us to the bitter end. And Iro, as always, thank you for accompanying me.
Thank you.
And until next time, we will see you amongst the sea of stars.